Hello and welcome to Coast AM's official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Norrie. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and of course, on coasttocoastam.com. At least 35 small pyramids, along with graves, have been discovered clustered very closely together at a site in Sudan. Remarkable. 13 pyramids are packed onto something slightly larger than an NBA basketball court. 13 pyramids. One of them, the biggest, is 22 feet at the base, and there's another one that is so small it's like only 30 inches at the base, but it's something marvelous. Go take a look. Somewhere there is a book that has your life in it. It has recorded everything you've done since the day you were born. And up next, we're going to talk with Aingeal Rose O'Grady about a time of change on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie. Let me tell you about our guest for the first couple hours here. During the past 40 years, Aingeal Rose O'Grady has acquired certifications in numerous healing modalities, including Reiki, all levels to master teacher. That's pretty impressive. Psychic laser therapy, hypnotherapy, including past life regression, Catharia healing, and so much more. She was a tarot reader and teacher for 35 years, teaching transforming and writing. She's been doing private Akashic record readings for clients worldwide over the past 15 years. And here she is on Coast to Coast. Aingeal Rose, how are you?
I'm good, George. Thanks for having me on tonight.
My pleasure. Tell me a little bit about these records. What exactly are they?
Well, the Akashic records are really the records of all of creation. It's not just an individual's particular library, although it certainly includes us, but it really is the history of everything that's ever happened in existence in creation. And I find it interesting that, there is this intelligence that does record every minute, every minutest little detail of life. And so for each person, they each have their own library book, as it's called, or your database, which is a record of all of your lifetimes since you were a soul, since you began. And it tracks your progress. It tracks your successes and failures, your ups and downs, the things that are hard for you. And you do come in each lifetime with a contract to achieve certain things. And so that's what the Akashic records are. They're really, really the history of everything.
And Gail, is it a book, almost like a physical book? I mean, if we were up there, would we physically be able to see this, or is it more spiritual?
Well, it is spiritual, although I have heard people say that there are holographic crystal discs that are in existence that actually are physical things that do hold recordings. But my experience of them is on the spiritual level, and they will appear as books for people, like a vast library that you actually go into and you have your own book. Other people experience them as little flames of fire that hold information, and I've had experiences of receiving them in very different ways throughout the use of them for myself.
Who's responsible for recording our lives?
George, I think it's a function of creation itself. I think creation does it. I think there's this stuff or this intelligence that once something happens, it's lodged in the field. It's in the field of all that is. And I think it's just a quality of the intelligence of life.
When we die, are we going to look at this book of records, the Akashic records? Are we going to be reviewed by it? Do they send us back to fix things? What happens?
Well, everyone will have their own life review, that's for sure.
Now, do we do that to ourselves, or is there some old teacher up there, pulling the book out?
No, I don't think there's a teacher. Well, let's see. You do have mentors that definitely are in charge of your records. So I do think it's a mechanism that happens with the spirit in terms of you seeing a videotape of your life this time. Now, I don't know when you die as if you'll see a lot of your past lifetimes, but you certainly will see a full accounting of this one. And I just think it is for review because each person, who I'm going to call each spirit, we're each a spirit, does want to achieve mastery. And mastery has wonderful potentials to it, and it does need to go through victories. So, the soul is really the part of us that accumulates the victories, keeps a record of our successes, and it will appear as bands of light, bands of color in terms of achievements. But everybody will have a review. They'll get to see and experience their effect on others and others' effects on them.
2 people die. One person had a stellar life, treated people kindly, loving. The other person, horrible, evil, a murderer. Both of them are there. Their records are being reviewed. What happens to the good person? What happens to the evil one?
That's a very good question. Well, the good person will probably be shown its victories, and a lot of what you're asking me will really determine where they go after they die. So let's say the person has had the stellar life and has been really great and kind to people, will still be shown, areas that it needs to master, and so it may go to a plane of existence where it's a guide to others, or it's a healer. I've seen people who end up in planes of music who were really advanced souls. So that's all different, and that's all individual. Now, the person who was a murderer, a lot of that depends on where they go and what happens to them. Depends on their particular consciousness and their willingness to accept responsibility for what they've done. So I have to be careful here because I never perceive punishment.
How come?
I don't perceive punishment because the Creator is a loving Creator. I don't see punishment. What I do see...
Yeah, if you look at Genesis, you'd take it the other way, wouldn't you?
Well, I'm not sure about the God in Genesis, you see.
Going to have this flood and kill all these people.
Yeah, I don't know about that God, George.
Jury's out on that one. Huh?
Anyway, but, what you are shown, you definitely are shown your effects on people. So there's no getting around that. I'm definitely not trying to say that somebody gets away scot-free because they don't.
I mean, because there is no way that the murderer, the evil person, is going to get the same kind of treatment as the loving, caring person. There's no way.
Well, let's just say that they won't advance to the same
level.
Yeah, they won't advance to the same level, and they definitely will have to reincarnate and go through more challenges and maybe be on the karmic receiving end of their actions. So all of those things are in place, but a soul does get to decide when it's coming back and does have a hand in setting up its own challenges. So, but ultimately, I do have to say that the source of creation is definitely forgiving. And, so it doesn't just say, well, you were a murderer, come on, I'm going to forgive you. It isn't like that. But ultimately, what its intention really is that each person alive will come to the place where they understand the will of the Creator, which is to love all beings and be harmless.
When you are going through your records, whatever it's done or how it's done, do you think people show remorse on the other side?
Some do. A lot of people do, and some don't. That's the exception, though. Most people that I see always show some sort of regret for things that they could have done better, could have done differently, wasting time.
Woulda, coulda.
Woulda, coulda, yeah. So there is a degree of that, and there are people who, once they cross over, they'll hang around until they can receive forgiveness from people they've left here.
For some reason, when I was a little boy, I always thought of reincarnation. And my view of reincarnation then, and it still holds up now, was that we keep coming back until we reach this level of perfection. Call it heaven, whatever you want to call it. In that, if you come back and you haven't done the right things, you come back again and again. I guess the mere fact that people on this program, for example, would talk about reincarnation and spirituality means that they've advanced to certain levels where maybe they don't have, many more lives to go before they stay on that plane of existence. But I always thought that you keep coming back until you get better and better and better. What do you think of that?
Well, you do, but I do have to say, and I'm probably going to lead off into something else here, but what I've been shown in the records is that reincarnation was not in the original plan. It's actually something that occurred because we fell into a loss of memory. And so it was a way for us to cycle back and forth so that we could learn. So you are correct in the sense that we do cycle back around to keep learning and perfecting. But there does come a point where you wake up and you start to remember your original self. And if that's the point where once you start remembering that, you start remembering, that everything is in relationship with you. And you start to become harmless. And when you start to come to those awarenesses, that's when your cycles of reincarnation most likely will be over.
Okay, our special guest for the next couple hours with our split show, Aingeal Rose O'Grady, her work, A Time of Change, as we talk about the Akashic Records. You're in it. I wonder what they say. Of course, you would probably know, wouldn't you? Well, we're going to come back in just a moment and talk more about this and get into some other areas as well. Next hour, we'll take your phone calls with her on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. Aingeal Rose O'Grady with us. Of course, we're talking about the Akashic Records. We're talking about you, your life. How did you get involved being a tarot reader?
Well, that was back when I was in my 20s. And I was married at 18, and my first husband was killed shortly after. So it put me on a spiritual path. I went to my first psychic. I wanted answers. And she became my first teacher, and I was just attracted to the tarot. So I learned it back in the 20s, back in my 20s.
What do you think of the tarot cards? Accurate?
I do think they're accurate. I think they hold a lot of levels, anything from simple answers to an entire spiritual path. So it depends how you use them, of course, and it depends who's reading them, because a lot of it can be subject to interpretation. But they do have certain guidelines, certain meanings, that anybody with a book could follow. But, that may not be entirely accurate when you're actually reading somebody. But I do think it has to do with who's actually reading them and how good they are.
Okay, let's get into some of the other issues involved with this. First of all, you talk a little bit about the fall. Are we talking about the angelic fall or something else?
We're talking about a dimensional split of this planet, and this was a surprise. And if you'll allow me, I'll give you a bit of the history on that. We had a group session one night where people just come and they ask spiritual questions, and they had to come because the topic was who are we and why are we here. It was the most popular session that we had. But when we asked the question, Source basically went into a long history. And it basically showed the planet before it was ever solid, and it was a swirling mass of light. And there were light beings there that were checking it out and seeing the possibilities. But what I actually saw was some sort of a cosmic wave just come through the universe and hit this sphere and knocked part of it anyway out of its particular orbit. So a piece of it actually started to descend and fall to a different level. So, and it gradually did that over billions and billions of years. But the consequence of that was that some of the light beings that were on that sphere fell with it, and some didn't. So this became the first beginning of rescue missions of light beings coming to this particular sphere, trying to not only get the people or the inhabitants back to their original state, but also to get this planet back to its original state, this peace. And we're all on the fallen peace.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, so, but what was so interesting about that answer was it said many of us who are here now in bodies who have been continually reincarnating for cycles and cycles, were those original spirit beings. And a lot of us just kept coming in trying to, put back together, let's say, the spirits that fell and the planet that fell. And we're still trying to do that, actually. That's really what many of us on a higher level are doing here. So, the story really resulted in a split in our consciousness because if you talk to anybody, most people will say that they do remember, not being this dense. They remember a different place. They'll say that they don't like being on Earth, that it's not home for them. And then other people will be totally involved in being an Earth person. Mm-hmm. And we have this split going on in our head.
And those people seem to be more grounded, too.
They do. But it does explain a lot of the conflict, as Source explained it to us, that we have two memories of two different Earths in our consciousness. And one of us, these are the old stories of paradise. Just about every religion has a story of paradise.
Yes.
And that certainly is Source's intention.
And there's got to be some basis to that, don't you think?
There is. And that's what I was being shown, that this planet was originally a paradise planet until it got struck and it started to fall and fell into denser and denser vibrations, and so did all the inhabitants over time. Now we're talking, obviously, billions of years. So we've ended up, in these dense bodies, which weren't natural to us originally. And we also have this ongoing conflict in our minds between light and dark. So it's difficult for us to try to resolve who we are. A lot of people, I thought it was interesting that night that, the confusion in people when they don't have a sense of who they are and what they're doing here. And that just shows the intense conflict that goes on in people back and forth between judgment and love and light and dark and good and evil, and all of those polarities actually are the result of that split, that original split.
Well, Aingeal, let me ask you, back to the Book of Records for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
The devil, where does the devil fit into this?
That's a good question. I don't know if I've actually officially asked about the devil. We've had a lot of conversations about evil, and so I do think there's definitely a consciousness that I would call evil. Now, Source would not label it evil, but what it would say is that anything that is against the life principle, it would put in the category of evil. And so that includes, control over people, suppression of their rights, messing with their minds, anything against love and sharing, things like that. So I think there's denser and denser levels of being who have fallen into darker and darker places.
Let's talk a little bit about near-death experiences and, of course, Judgment Day as well. So you're not a believer that if you die, you go to heaven or hell, are you?
Well, I don't think it's as simple as that. I think there's lots of levels. There's many, many planes of existence after death. I don't believe that there's a hell that you never get out of. But I do know that there is levels of existence that are definitely like hell, and the beings will stay there precisely because they don't have enough spiritual, let's say, they don't have enough spiritual benevolence to move themselves into higher levels. And that is really where the concept of praying for people came from.
I read an old book on astral projection, Aingeal, years ago. Sylvan Muldoon and Hayward Carrington wrote it. They talked about different levels on the astral plane.
Right.
Different tiers. And they did say that there were some levels you didn't want to hang around. These, whatever they were, these entities, they were so ghastly that you wanted to escape.
That's true. That's true. In fact, years ago, I was actually taught by Archangel Raphael for many years when I was younger, and Raphael would take me on journeys, and she would take me past those planes and tell me not to look there, that I wasn't ready for it, and just took me to other places. And then it wasn't until years later that I actually got to take a closer look, and it would be your descriptions of hell or evil entities that are not nice. So, yes, that's there.
How did an archangel get in touch with you?
Well, that was an accident.
What happened?
Well, I was living in Philadelphia, and I was fairly new on my path, a couple of years, and I had some material in my possession that I thought was really fantastic. And I got a phone call one night from my teacher that I just mentioned to you earlier, who had not talked to me in 2 or 3 years. She gave self-awareness classes, and she called me and told me that Archangel Raphael appeared to her whole class and told them that I had material in my possession that was not what I thought it was, and I was to burn it immediately. And henceforth, I was only to call on Raphael before I did any sort of meditating or spiritual exploration. So I started it, and that angel evidenced itself in my life on 2 occasions, proved that it was really who it said it was. But it taught me a whole lot about inner alchemy and inner virtues, and showed me past lives and all sorts of things. It took me to other worlds.
Has that archangel stayed in your life now to date?
It is in my life, yes. I don't call on Raphael as much anymore, but every now and then, because I got into the Course in Miracles and I got into lots of different things. But whenever I would think of it and check in and say, are you still there? It always proves itself because somebody will pop up and give me a statue of him.
Synchronicity.
Every single time. It's happened 3 times already.
Do you tap into the angel at moments of crisis?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that I'm aware of that. I mean, I've had moments of crisis, but I'm aware of just being loved by Source. That's the best thing I can explain. I think Raphael was my teacher and is my teacher in the background, but since then, my connection to Source has strengthened.
Your work, A Time of Change. Tell me about that.
Yes, that book is a result of all of the group Akashic record meetings that we've had since 2010 in Ireland and the United States, and they came about precisely because people were asking lots of questions about 2012 and the economy and the one world order and all sorts. So we decided to have group meetings where they could come and ask those questions. So when I opened the records, it was the first time I'd done that. What did surprise me was that it was Source that came through and answered us directly, as opposed to when you do a personal reading, that doesn't happen. You're really in an individual soul energy.
Like the opposite of a Ouija board, except something good comes through?
What'd you say?
It's the opposite of a Ouija board, except something good comes through?
Well, I wouldn't even compare it to a Ouija board.
Okay, good.
Yes, it was definitely a consistent, benevolent presence. Yeah.
And you could feel that.
Oh, absolutely. Everybody could feel it. Yeah, it's a whole different energy entirely.
Do these records talk at all about the future?
They do, in terms of they will and have shown me probable futures, and also how to get out of some of those futures. So I don't perceive everything as fixed.
So we can change the future, alter it.
You can definitely change the future, absolutely.
That's dramatic all by itself.
Yes. Yes, and we were, because inevitably people did ask me a lot about Earth changes, and I was seeing a lot of Earth changes, and I would report them, and yes, they would occur, but then there came to a point, just in the last year actually, where Source was really talking to us about, how we can manifest those outcomes if we talk about them too much or if we put too much attention on them. So it was really saying it wasn't necessary. In other words, Earth changes are not a prerequisite for a planet to evolve to a higher place. It happens because there's so much imbalance.
Well, there is a lot of imbalance, but tell me we have a bright future. What do you see?
We do. In fact, I'm going to go back just to December 21st because 2 things were happening then. One was people were reporting this incredible sorrow and grief, and they couldn't understand it.
And it's still ongoing, by the way.
It is. Yes, it is. And so, but alongside of that, you also had people who were speaking that they were feeling euphoric. And so I did check in on both of those, and I did get a great explanation for the sorrow from Source, which I'll tell you about in a minute if you want to hear it.
Yeah.
But I literally saw a door open in December, and I literally saw Christ walk through that door and all these blessings, and I don't believe they came from Jesus, but they were streaming through and blessing not just our planet, but the whole of creation. So I checked again today because I thought it might be a question you might want to know, especially since the earthquakes that just happened, and
That's
obviously
right.
the Earth is
It's going through a state
very
of
active
flux
right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Extremely.
But what I still saw these blessings all over this earth. And what really is going on is we are adjusting to this new energy, and it is going to manifest.
At what point?
Well, I do think we have until we got another good 10 or 15 years, to be very honest.
To pull out of this?
For a lot of it to calm down, for a lot of new paradigms to be in place.
That's a long time of grief, isn't it?
Well, no, I don't think that it's all going to be grief because, okay, let me go back to what Source told us the grief is. Source told us that it's like we're going into this birth canal and we're being squeezed. And, this light is coming in, and as it is coming in, it is stimulating a lot of unhealed things in people. It's kind of like when you pour the clear water in a glass with sand in it, the sand gets stirred up. The same thing is happening to us. We've all done a really great job of putting things under the rug, So it showed us that it was all coming out. It was going out into the atmosphere, and the old world is dying. It's just not going to be the same. And in that process, you will have people leave. They won't be able to handle the pressure of it, and some are not meant to. So there is this whole shift. It's happening on so many levels. It's happening to our biologies. It's happening to the plant life, the animal life. We've seen under the oceans. The under the oceans are getting hotter and hotter. So there's a cleansing, huge cleansing going on, and everybody's feeling it. So,
but with this incredible roller coaster we're on, what makes you think we're going to pull out of it? I hope you're right. But what do you see that would have you say that?
Because at the same time, all this topsy-turvy stuff is happening because we have been, I'm going to call them blessings, and I'm not trying to sound religious, but that's what they feel like to me. We are being supported in manifesting in a way that we never have before. And I don't know if you've noticed it or any of your guests have noticed it, but...
Well, one of the things I've noticed, and we've talked about it, is a feeling of something impending.
Right.
We don't know what it is, and we don't know when it will be, but we all feel it. You too?
I do feel it. And I have days of great anxiousness at times, and then other days it feels like it's the most miraculous occurrence ever is going to happen.
See, I'm not sure it's going to be a good thing.
Well, I still think you're going to have both. When people ask me about earth changes and things, I was like, we're still in it. It's not like I'm going to say all of a sudden that's just going to disappear. We're on a wild ride for a while.
You got to hold on.
Yep.
You fall off, look out.
Yes. Yeah, we do have to be ready for anything.
How do you prepare yourself for that?
Well, I have to say, I always do advise people that I think they should have things in their home, for any sort of earth change. I just think that's practical at this stage of the game.
The typical hard things like storable food, radios, things like that?
I do.
Okay. Well, that's a given, I think.
Yeah, I do too. And there's still many people who don't do it. But the other part of it is all of us are really being called on the carpet to be very responsible with how we live our lives now. And I think that's a big part of the change. Not only do we have to do some inner work in terms of taking a real hard look at ourselves, but we have to be cooperative with others. And, Source would say very practical things in the book like, do you know who your neighbors are? You're in your community. what are you doing in your community? Are you coming together, or what are you doing?
The old days of sitting on a lawn chair in your garage with your neighbors, those days are gone. Aingeal Rose with us. We're going to take your phone calls as we talk about the Book of Records on Coast to Coast AM. You're listening to Coast AM on our official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Norrie, and don't forget to visit the Coast Insider membership area on coasttocoastam.com, where you can access our past, upcoming, and classic shows.